All right, welcome to episode 26 of the ASKJV Podcast. Today I'm answering questions about how to get started as an engineer, what drum reverbs I like to use, and Beat Detective versus Elastic Audio.
3, 2, 1. This is the ASKJV Show.
Our first question comes from Marvel. How do I get myself started as an engineer? How do I get my first clients if I'm not a person who knows bands or artists?
Well, I've kind of tackled this question before, but you definitely add a unique twist to it saying that you don't know any bands or artists. That's kind of the first thing I say to people is if you're in a band, then definitely put your own band stuff out there and work on it. If you have friends who are in bands, start there. That's the best and easiest way to start. But if you don't have that, it's definitely a little harder, but I think you're just going to have to try and get yourself out there, offering free work, trying to make connections with bands who are in your area. So spend some time, looking on Facebook, maybe asking around. Maybe you don't know any bands or anyone, but maybe a family member or a friend does. You're just going to have to try to utilize your network a little bit, and the internet should help with that. You can reach out to bands. One suggestion is when you're getting started, you're going to have to do some free work. Obviously, you've got to provide the value up front, prove yourself. Start those relationships before people are going to be willing to pay you if you've got nothing on your resume. So, but one thing that I always suggest is to word it as a demo. So if you go up to someone and say, hey, I want to record your next EP for free, or record your next song with me, I'll do it for free. It depends where the band's at, but especially for a more established band, you're actually going to scare them away because when they hear free recording, they're going to think it's going to be no good anyway and a waste of their time. But if you say free demo, it kind of lowers the bar. It switches their thinking to, instead of this guy's an amateur just trying to get, his name on our stuff for free. It switches their mindset to be more of like, okay, yeah, we're working on some new songs. Maybe we'll go and do some demos that would be better than what we could do in our garage or practice room, but it'll be free. And it's more valuable to them, I think, when it's phrased that way. So I always recommend that. And then, of course, just do your best job you possibly can on the demos. Work really hard on it. Deliver above what they would expect. And then hopefully from there, you've got at least one good relationship started and you can continue that on. Maybe it will lead to you working on their next album or EP or whatever. And then maybe they've got friends who are in other bands and the word of mouth will start to spread. And you're just going to have to grind it for the first bit and work hard and try to get opportunities like that.
Our next question comes from Johnny. What kind of reverb do you use for drums?
Well, I tried to use minimal reverb on drums. I'm kind of averse to reverb anyway. I won't get into that. I'm just not a huge fan of reverb. But for drums, yeah, if I get a drum kit that was recorded without any room tracks, or if the room tracks are really bad, then I'll use a room reverb. So I'll just, choose your favorite reverb plugin and then use like a small room setting. Not like a huge ambience. The goal is to have it actually sound like a drum room, so not some big long tail. You just want it to give a little bit of ambience and make it feel like it's in a real room. I use the Waves impulse response reverb paired with some Berkasti unit impulses that I found online. You can get those for free if you just do some searching. But that's what I use for drum reverb. And then other than the room reverb, if I use it, I'd say in half of my mixes, I just use the actual room mics as my ambience for the drums. I don't use a room reverb at all. But other than that, I'll have like a gated reverb on snare. So just a really quick, punchy reverb just to give some more size and fatness to the snare. And then I'll also use a long plate for the snare. So again, I use the Waves impulse response with the Berkasti snare plate. I've been toying around with the Slate Lexicon reverb emulation as well for that. It seems to be pretty cool. But yeah, a longer, 1-2 second long plate for the snare reverb, and then I'll have that set at different levels throughout the mix depending on how long the snare needs to be. So that's it. Pretty simple for reverb on drums.
Here's our next question. Hey Jordan, I use several Waves plugins on my mixes, but even with an i5 processor, my CPU keeps overloading and crashing my DAW on me once I use too many. What do you do to keep your plugins from crashing your CPU?
Well, I'm not much of a computer nerd when it comes to this stuff, so I don't know. I don't really have specific tips. There might be something weird going on with your system. It's funny because I personally have not run into these issues. My Mac Pro that I'm using is 2009, I think, so it's probably less powerful in terms of the processor than yours. I don't have any problems with this. Even now with my Pro Tools 12 rig where I'm completely mixing with native plugins, I haven't run into this issue. So I would say maybe you need to comp down your sessions a little bit. So, if you have a bunch of layers of something, maybe background vocals, maybe you have 10 background vocal tracks, maybe you need to just pre-mix those down to a stereo track. Do the same thing for other instruments. And with the new Pro Tools 12, you've got the option to freeze tracks and quickly commit plugins to audio. So that can obviously help as well. That's it. I mean, do some Googling around. I know back in the day, there was definitely some things with Pro Tools where, if there's 12 processors in the Mac, you can set it to use a certain number of processors for the plugins. And there was a weird thing, like you had to set it to an odd number for it to work best. If you set it to an even number of processors, it would be kind of wonky. But just Google, check it out. I'm not the best authority to ask this question, but yeah, you shouldn't be having those problems. So search around, try those things that I said, and go from there.
Our last question comes from Nelson. Hey, Jordan, any reason why you're using Beat Detective over Elastic Audio?
Yeah, I've tried both Elastic Audio and Beat Detective, and I just think Beat Detective sounds better. I haven't used Elastic Audio, at least on drums, for a long, long time. It just, at first use, it was very impressive, and I thought it would totally replace Beat Detective for me, but I don't know, there was just something, I felt like I was losing some punch or some clarity, or just kind of it veiled my drums a little bit. So I just went with Beat Detective, and it kind of makes sense because if you're using Elastic Audio, you are directly affecting that audio file and the sound of that file because you're manipulating it, you're stretching it or compressing it. Whereas Beat Detective, you're just cutting it and moving it around and then crossfading. So technically, when it comes to the transient and everything and the sound of the actual track, you're not manipulating it with Beat Detective. I mean, you're cutting it and fading and moving stuff around. But again, as far as the actual hits go on the drums with Beat Detective, you're not actually compromising the quality at all of it. So that's kind of why I still think Beat Detective is the way to go. All right, that's it for this week's episode. If you've been following along with the email list and everything, or on Facebook, you might have seen that I launched my new mixing course called Mix Vault last week, which is a really in-depth 4-month mixing program. It's all closed down now. It was just a 1-week opening, but I got an awesome big group of engineers through there, so I'm really excited to connect with you if you're inside that program. If not, no worries. I got more programs coming up in the next few months, and then next year probably we'll run the Mix Vault course again. But anyways, it was fun doing this episode as always. Submit your questions to AskJVPod.com. That's the best way to get your questions in. There's always lots of questions lined up, but we do our best to get through them all eventually. So if you need to know something about engineering, recording, mixing, whatever, definitely submit your questions. I'll try to get it on this show. And if you're not on my email list, go to hardcoremusicstudio.com and join up there to get a bunch of free videos, free training, lots of free content. All my best stuff is sent out through there. So that's it for this week, guys. We'll see you next time.